Hey everybody, tonight I'm talking about the super cool trend in scuba diving called Blackwater. What is it? How do you dive it? And especially, how do you take semi-interesting pictures while Blackwater diving? So let's dive right into the Blackwater. Okay, what is Blackwater? Blackwater essentially is a night dive where we're not diving on the reef, but we're diving in the water and we're looking for something that is in the water. In order to attract things that are in the water, essentially small animals, pelagic animals, or animals that are eating pelagic animals, we suspend lights. These lights essentially act as a beacon or something that these fish and crab and all these other animals find attractive and swim towards to. We swim around those lights looking for tiny little things, and we do that fully suspended in blackness. So, who is this Blackwater diving for? If you are a complete novice, if you're a complete beginner, you might find it slightly disorienting because you have nothing to orient about. So, if you're wanting to know if you are ready for Blackwater diving, especially unguided Blackwater diving, you should try scuba diving and closing your eyes for a moment and seeing if you can control your buoyancy without looking. That would be very helpful. Regardless how good you are, if it's your first time Blackwater diving, make sure you do it with somebody that knows what they're doing and they can help you out. The second thing that I would say is very important is make sure you set a depth alarm on your dive computer, because it's very easy once you're following an interesting little subject, it will drift down and you follow it and suddenly you don't know it and you're at 35 meters in the middle of the night over open bottom. So I recommend setting the depth alarm. So we've got two different ways of doing it. One is called bonfire. Not really enjoying that one so much as the real Blackwater. Bonfire means we put some lights on the reef or a substrate somewhere and shine up, and then we just swim in the beam. But you always see the reef, and essentially it's animals that are close to the reef. The really cool way of doing Blackwater diving is by suspending lights from the boat or from a float, and we put the lights on one line or two lines at 1 meter, 5 meter, 10 meter, 15 meter, etc. And these lights are suspended over open bottom. The water could be 50 meters, 100 meters, or 5,000 meters. And that is actually where we get the most interesting results. What we're trying to do is drifting with a slow ocean current. And in this slow ocean current is where we have a lot of juvenile fish, juvenile animals of any sort, and animals that just never come to a reef, like, for example, the paper nautilus, which is a super cool little octopus. Anyway, what we're doing here, and that is the second spoiler alert that I want to give you, is we're doing macro diving. It is very rare that anything is any bigger than this kind of distance or that kind of thing, right? It is never any bigger than that. If you get a subject that's 5 or 10 centimeters, that is already quite rare. So it is a macro game, so make sure that you know that you're going into a very disorienting situation. You're going to be hunting for small things and you'll be taking macro photography. If that doesn't scare you and you're still keen, why don't you guys join me on a Blackwater dive here in Hong Kong right now? Hey everyone, we're out here on the ocean and today we're doing Blackwater diving. So Blackwater diving is a photography task. It's something that we do as photographers and it's most interesting if you got the proper equipment. So what I have here is a system camera. Any system camera will do, but the faster the focus the better. I'm going to have two strobes, 1, 2. They should be pointing forward behind the lens. that reduces the backscatter in front. You also have a focus light, that's super important. And the most important thing for me is to have a spotlight rather than a focus light. That means you can fix the spot where you're going to focus, and when your finger or the animal that you're shooting moves out of the spotlight, it will be out of the light. So you will always know when to shoot. So set that up before you dive. So with this spotlight, the important thing is once you get in the water is you check your correct focus distance. Where your finger is where the animal is going to be. And then you do a test shot and you make sure that that finger only goes in the light when it's in focus. And then you focus, you do your test shot. You look onto your screen and you check that that finger looks well lit and the background is dark. If the background is bright, reduce the power of your strobes and open them up a little bit. Don't point too much inwards, that's going to help. I've also used a second light, so instead of having just one light, I also have a second light that will give me red light. So I can mix red light and white light or have just red light. Why do we use that? We use it when there's subjects that are afraid of the light. So then we use red light, but you need to have a very strong red light, otherwise you won't see anything and the camera won't be able to focus. So that's why I put the second light next to it, put it on low, and then we've got a mixture between red and white light. One other thing that we have to talk about is settings. Every camera is different, every camera lens combination is different, so I can only give a rough guidance. But essentially, the simple way of thinking about it is if your aperture is wide, then the backscatter will not be so much in focus, it will be not so sharp, and the smallest particles will disappear. So generally you want to shoot with a wide aperture, so with a low depth of field, but not too low, because if it's too low, then only a tiny bit of the animal will be sharp and the rest will be out of focus. So what I do is I start with about a third of my available focus length. So if my Nikon 60mm lens will have a maximum f-stop of 36 as the smallest f-stop, I'll start around 10 and work my way up and down from there. If the animals are larger, you will want to use a smaller aperture, higher aperture number, so that more of the animal is in focus. But if you're shooting small things, it's quite good to actually shoot with a wide aperture. Now the second thing to consider is if you are using a full frame and 100 or 105mm lens or something similar, then you have very, very limited depth of field. So in that case, I would start with 2/3 of your available focal length. So if it's a 36mm, you'd start around 20. Yeah, because those lenses have so little depth of field that everything will be out of focus and won't be very helpful. The shutter speed is a different topic. It's not super relevant because we're flashing everything up with light, but generally you want to go fast because you're shaking your camera, etc. So I would use something from between 125 and 200. However, if you want to do slow shutter speed, then of course you can use a slower shutter around 1/15 or 1/20, right? Finally, ISO. ISO generally just says how bright the picture is. So if you make the ISO to 100, you just basically need to power up the strobes and you can't shoot as fast. So that's why a sort of a good starting point is maybe ISO to 100. And if the blackness, if your background looks too bright, first try to fine tune your strobes before you're adjusting the ISO. Last thing is autofocus. Okay, autofocus is very difficult in this game because they're very small things and they're moving and you've got no frame reference. So I use center focus and single focus and I use a thumb focus in order to find it. Like that, you can also hold the focus once you've got it and do the last bit of adjusting and shoot from there. So that is the way I use it. Other people use continuous, but definitely don't use multi-point. Even the cross is no good because it will just pick up other things. It's hard enough to get it center and you can crop it any way you like afterwards because it's anyway black canvas. And basically everybody is gonna go look after themselves, but essentially orbit around the light. Not actually right in the light. It's actually the best is outside of the light is just to attract things, right? But if you swim into the light, it's going to blind you. So you don't really want to be in there, right? So the idea is to just swim around at the 10 meter, 15 meter, whatever, 20 even. And I always suggest to have when you have the torch on, you're basically doing full lightsaber mode, okay? Up, down, right, left, down, everywhere. Until you see something that's bigger than shit. Okay, and even if it's shit, it might be still interesting. Okay, so you want to be looking for anything that's interesting. If you're just looking at it for you're not doing photography, the best is from below. Yeah, that's how you can see it best. Okay, now if the animal is swimming away from your light, block the light and just do a little bit. Some animals swim away from the light. Okay, and you find everything with your spot torch. Once you found it, the hard thing is to actually manage to photograph it. That's the really hardest part. What you can try, so generally you want to put the strobes forward. These, yeah, so because you can direct the light a little bit and reduce the backscatter a little bit. Doesn't help that much. And actually, when it's really shitty, you can also take them off. So I usually will just try taking them off sometimes, try on, you have to try different things, right? But the most important thing is getting it in focus.
Have you ever tried with a camera that has like a focus distance restriction?
Yeah, so that's in his mirrorless he can do that. This definitely helps. Yeah, definitely helps. This is camera can do that. Yeah, so you should limit it so it doesn't go to infinity, because what's the point? Sheesh, that was not a good dive, but you know what? That is a lesson for blackwater diving. Blackwater is not always great. You just have to accept the fact that it is often not very good and that you will have to invest in order to get the best results. I always take it like a thing that you should do at least 3 times before you give it judgment. There are amazing dives to be had, but some of them are crap, like this one today. Before I end this video, I want to give you one last tip, and this tip is only for photographers, and I wouldn't give this tip for any other scuba dive for photographers, but for blackwater diving, I take a snorkel. So why would I take a snorkel? The reason you take a snorkel is if you're coming to the surface, there's actually a lot of cool subjects right underneath the surface. And if you want to take them without destroying the reflection on the surface, well then you need this snorkel because your exhaust bubbles will break the surface and you will have much less good reflection. So that is my last tip. Use a snorkel if you're a photographer and doing blackwater diving. And with that, I'd like to close, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to my channel. There's lots of really great content about photography, about animals, about trips, or maybe even join me on one of my trips. We do scuba diving, free diving, tech diving all around the world. Wherever there's good animals, good interactions, good stuff to see, we're there. So please join us on one of these trips. And for now, bye-bye.